Check one, 2, 3. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. Welcome everyone to the Location Sound Podcast. My two special guests today are Paul Isaacs, Director of Product Management and Design at Sound Devices, and Gary Trenda, RF Applications Engineer at Sound Devices. Welcome, gentlemen.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right. Paul was a previous guest on episode 61, but Gary, this is your first time with us, so kind of tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm the RF Applications Engineer at Sound Devices. I joined Sound Devices a little over a year ago. Before that, I was just a freelance RF technician. I did a lot of different special events and work in sports and some different things with wireless audio. I think a lot of people know me from doing stuff like the Super Bowl halftime show. I've done the entertainment portion of the Super Bowl for the last 6 years. I've done music award shows like Latin Grammy Awards and Billboard Awards and things like that. And so a lot of large-scale RF systems with some wireless intercom thrown in there. So kind of good amount of field experience that I could bring into the application side of Sound Devices.
Now, how has your experience as an RF technician and frequency coordinator kind of influenced your work at Sound Devices?
I think I come into my job at Sound Devices with sort of the user perspective about what kind of challenges there are in the field for people running wireless systems and trying to set up wireless mics. And as a frequency coordinator, you kind of understand that besides the wireless mics that one user has in a large event, you might have 100 frequencies. And so trying to band plan things and fit that in there is something that we talk about a lot at Sound Devices. With film sets are busy places. Your RF environment can be pretty crowded, and particularly in urban areas with a lot of digital television or any other interfering signals that might be, on set or on location wherever you're working. And so I think that's the kind of experience that I bring into it. And we, kind of talk through the best ways to address some of those challenges.
We kind of wanted to talk about the Sound Devices A20-RX 2-channel True Diversity Receiver and its new features, and also the A20-Mini transmitters. First off, I'll kind of set the stage. I had a chance to demo the A20-Mini transmitters and the A10 2-channel Digital Diversity Receiver. And my setup was with my Sound Devices 833 mixer with the SL2.
Oh, yeah.
And for those who don't know, that's the dual super slot wireless module. I had the A10 receiver with the super slot backplate, so it was inserted into the SL2, and I was able to control the A10 receiver from the mixer menus, and one of my favorites was to update the firmware right from the mixer.
Mm-hmm. It makes it easier, right?
It's still one of my favorite features, and I would love for other companies to adopt that same thing. So, but I loved it, and I used the A20 remote app on my phone to also control various features as well. So. But one of the big things I noticed, the A20 Mini transmitter, it has a really small footprint. So I usually put it in like a talent's pocket or use like an Ursa strap or something. So they don't really have a traditional clip. So do you guys know of any other ways that other users have hidden transmitters on talent, things like that?
Yeah, I think Ursa straps are kind of one of the more common ways to do it. Or something, you can have just a small pocket sewn in if you're working with wardrobe. To put it in there. Obviously it comes with a small pouch that has a belt clip on it. So if you do need to clip it, you've got that option. I've seen some third-party kind of 3D printed things that people are doing to put clips on them if you need a clip. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. I think the nice thing about the A20 Mini is it's got this curved shape to it on kind of all sides, so it's very easy to fit it in a small pouch. And so however you can work a pouch into the wardrobe, you've got a lot of different places you could put it.
Yeah, and because it's got soft edges, rather than sort of like sharp corners, it hides very fluidly under clothing, soft clothing. It's sort of like, it's very easy to hide.
Now, like I said, I use the A10. So let's talk about between the A10 and the A20 receivers. Can we kind of break down the differences between the two?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to put two of them side by side, you'd struggle to see any difference because they use exactly the same chassis and form factor. So they do look identical, apart from the sort of printing on the surface of the actual unit. But the fundamental differences between the A20-RX and the A10-RX is that the A20 has this much wider tuning range from 470 megahertz all the way up to 1525 megahertz, which is like over a gigahertz of tuning range. There's no other product like that in our industry that covers such a wide range. And, that does give a lot more versatility to the product. You can use it anywhere in the world. I mean, Gary can go into more about the licensing aspects of that, but just to give a brief overview, it sort of means that you don't have to be concerned about holding multiple different models of receiver to cover such a wide frequency range. It's just one SKU which covers all of those frequencies. And likewise with the corresponding A20-Mini transmitter. Because when we released the A20-RX receiver, we also released a firmware update, a free firmware update for A20-Mini users, which expanded the tuning range from 470 to 1525 as well. The other big thing about the A20-RX is its front-end filtering. We've spent a lot of time focusing on this to really make the system as immune as possible from out-of-band interference. And we're seeing a step improvement on this compared to other receivers on the market. And we can get into the weeds on that. We refer to those two core technologies of the A20-RX, that they come under this banner which we call SpectraBand, SpectraBand technology. And we've got some great articles on our website about it if you really want to read about it as well. But that really covers these two things, the super wide range, tuning range, and the really steep filtering.
You mentioned FCC licensing. Can you talk a little bit about those higher frequencies and what maybe your average, say, audio bag user needs to do?
Sure. Yeah. So speaking about users in the United States, I think most people in the U.S. are used to using wireless microphones in what's the UHF TV band. So in the United States, that's 470 to 608 megahertz. So within that band, some products are allowed to be used on an unlicensed basis, and that's generally products that are 50 milliwatts or less transmit power. But higher transmit power and some certain other things will require a license with the FCC, Federal Communications Commission in the United States. So to get a license from the FCC, they call that a Part 74 license. And you can apply for that license with the FCC. And actually, I think it's the IATSE 695 website's got a good tutorial on how to apply for that license. So I'd recommend people take a look at that if they're interested in it. You can get a license for the UHF TV band to operate at higher power levels, but there are some additional bands that are license only. So there's a portion around 650 megahertz that's license only. There's another portion of the spectrum up in about 950 megahertz. It's what we call the STL band, 941.5 to 960. And so both of those ranges require a license to operate there. And so provided that you have that license, the new A20 receiver and the A20 Mini can operate in these ranges with that SpectraBand technology that Paul's talking about.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of talk out there. Just owning wireless, we should get our FCC Part 74 license just because it lets the FCC know we have them. Because I know there's a lot of people that have wireless, they've never registered, and it just lets them know and gives us a voice versus like, oh, there's nobody out there using these, and that's a plus.
Yeah, I think people who've been using wireless systems for some years now have seen these auctions where they've sold off first, the bulk of 700 megahertz, and now the bulk of 600 megahertz has been sold to other uses, primarily mobile data uses, some public safety and other things. But when the FCC looks at having those auctions and auctioning off spectrum, they look at how many licensed users there are. And so, as you say, it really does give us a stronger voice if all of the users of professional wireless microphones and other wireless systems that are used in location sound, if they all get licensed for those systems, the FCC has a lot more visibility to how many people are actually using these systems and what kind of an impact these auctions might have on the folks using that spectrum.
I guess it's pretty unlikely if people started registering now, they're going to make those bands available again. The horse is bolted.
Well, yeah, and that's true. And I think, but there's always talk of what's the next piece of spectrum that's going to get auctioned off. And we've answered some questions about spectrum and, along those lines, people saying, well, I remember having to sell all of my wireless or throw away all my wireless and buy all new when the last auction happened. If I happened to have a band that was maybe in, the upper part of 600 megahertz that's now just illegal to operate in. And so Spectrum Band does give you some future-proof aspect to it where, because we have such a wide tuning range, and really all we're doing is we're restricting that tuning range to the specific country's regulations. So as long as there's some, legal place to operate wireless microphones between 470 and 1525 megahertz, we'll be able to, use the Sound Devices hardware in that range.
All right, well, talk about gain forward.
Gain forward. So with the launch of the A20 Mini, which was about 12 months ago or so, we introduced this thing called gain forward. And essentially what that means, the benefit to the end user is they no longer have to worry about adjusting the gain on the transmitter itself. The age-old problem of being concerned about talent going from a whisper to a scream and preventing the transmitter itself from overloading with a scream or with a whisper sort of being too undermodulated and therefore the wanted signal being lost in the noise. And so there's always been this extra thought process that a sound mixer has to go through, and that is monitoring and setting up and optimizing the trim level on their transmitter. Well, gain forward negates the need to do that. And essentially, it turns your wireless transmitter into a wireless mic. Just like you plug your wired mic into a mixer recorder, you'd adjust the trim gain directly on your mixer recorder. It's essentially exactly the same with now this gain forward technology. And the way we do it is by having a mic preamp input stage on the A20 Mini, which has got a vast dynamic range. Actually, it's around 130 dBs of dynamic range, which is considerably more than the dynamic range of really any lav mic out there. So it can handle the loudest sound or level of sound from any lav mic, and it's also got a preamp which is much quieter than the noise that a lav mic can generate. So what it boils down to is the user can just choose the lav mic that is the correct sensitivity for the application that they need. And what the A20 Mini does, and by virtue of its multi-stage ADC architecture, is transmit that whole 130 dB dynamic range from the transmitter directly to the A20 or A20-RX receiver. And, if you said you use the SL2, if you've got your A10 or A20-RX mounted in your SL2, the signal coming out of the receivers is going to go digitally from there into your mixer recorder, and no additional noises in that signal path because it's a digital signal path, and therefore you can adjust the trim on your actual 8 series. But it's not just restricted to users of SL2 or even the 8 series. If you're connecting the AES digital outputs of your A10-RX or A20-RX to your mixer recorder, what you typically do there is set your receiver to unity gain and then just do all your gain adjustments from the mixer recorder. So whether you're using our A10 rack with a Dante output or directly the AES outputs from your receivers, that will give you the benefits of that. No backlink required to adjust your trim gain. That's the huge benefit. Gary, got anything else to add to all of that?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, at this point, you just need to pick the right lav mic that has the right sensitivity, because the thing that could overload would be your lav mic element. But then once you've got the audio coming off of the lav, you're going right into the A20 Mini, and that gain forward passes it all the way through. Yeah, and if you think about, we're talking, maybe 110 dB or less dynamic range on the lav mic, 130 dB on the mic pre on the gain forward side of things in the A20-Mini, and then coming out AES at unity gain, and an AES3 digital signal is 144 dB or so of dynamic range. So we're just sort of sending it all forward, if you will, gain forward to your first, place where you're adjusting it is your trim on your mixer recorder.
We were chatting to one of our customers a few weeks back who's working on horror movies right now, and he absolutely loves this whole gain forward thing because typically in those you're getting lots of whispering going to screaming, and it's very unpredictable. You just never know where you are. So he says he pretty much can't live without that technology now.
Yeah, I've been working on a YouTube Kids series, and we did a recent episode for Halloween, and it was deafening. And you're trying to find that balance between your transmitters and you can ride your trim at the mixer, but if they're distorting at the pack, it's not helping. So, and of course they never tell you when they're going to scream. So, all right, well, let's talk more about the Q meter.
Sure. So Q is something we introduced with a firmware update a few months ago on the A10 series and the A20-Mini, and then of course it carries through now that we've launched the A20 receiver. So all of that wireless kit has got the Q meter option. So Q meter is essentially showing you your signal quality for your digital signal, and I think people are used to the old RSSI meters, the receive signal strength indication that you have on there. It just looks like a few bars. You go up to 4 bars worth of is full signal, and then your bars start to drop as the signal drops. We've seen a lot of people operating in very noisy RF environments where there might be an interfering signal that is underneath your wireless mic transmitter. And so that interfering signal would show up on your signal bars as, hey, there's a signal here, because your signal bars don't really know the difference between the signal from your wireless mic transmitter and then an interferer. So what the Q meter does is actually looks at that signal to noise ratio, like what's the signal we're getting, the wanted signal from our wireless mic transmitter versus maybe an unwanted interfering signal. And so if you've got 5 bars of Q on your Q meter, that's telling you that you've got very good signal from your wireless mic and that there's very little interference. And so as you start to get further and further from your antennas, if you see your Q and your signal drop together, that's giving you a good indication that you might be at the edge of range. If you see your signal bars stay high, but your Q starts to drop, that's going to give you an indication that there may be some interference that you need to address. And usually the easiest thing to do there is to rescan and then move to an alternate frequency away from that interference.
Could you kind of for our listeners, kind of break down what a true diversity system means?
Yeah, so for us, the A10 and the A20 receivers are both, true diversity systems. And what we mean by that is that each audio channel has 2 radio receivers. And so you've got an A antenna and a B antenna. And each one of those have their own receiver path. And the receiver takes, in our case, a digital signal that comes in, and it decodes it to ones and zeros. And so we're able to look at the A and the B path of ones and zeros and make those comparisons to decide which antenna has the best signal coming in, the best audio at that point. Other systems, there's a number of different ways to do it, but I think the one I get asked about the most is just an antenna switching system where there'd be one receiver path, and then there's a circuit that decides between the A and the B antenna which it thinks has the best RF signal. And so that happens before the signal is decoded into audio. And so that's our differentiator between a true diversity system and some other scheme.
Another quick question regarding the audio limited wireless family. Do you have some best practices that, say, a new user could apply to make sure they're getting the most out of those?
This is a whole day's worth of seminar.
I know. Just, maybe top 3.
I think, the couple of things that we highlight for people with audio limited is, the heritage of audio limited has always been audio quality first. Their reputation in the UK before Sound Devices acquired them was just that they had the best audio quality in an analog wireless system, and we tried to carry that along into the digital realm with the A10 and now A20 line of products. So we focus a lot on, as we've talked about with Gain Forward, the mic pre's in there. The A10 transmitter is sort of unique that it can do 48 volt phantom power, and you can plug it in directly to like a boom mic. It's very popular for a boom application. And it is that full digital true diversity system where we're trying to give you the best possible audio quality. And now with the A20, we're trying to give you the best possible range in sort of hostile RF environments. And so I think that's what we try to highlight with people to think about with the audio limited system is if you want excellent audio quality with full digital signal and good, ability to avoid some of these interfering signals that you find.
Another thing that we introduced actually via a firmware update going back several months now was this new modulation scheme. When the A10 first came out, several years ago, we had this one modulation scheme, which gave sort of good range and, sounded great. Everyone says it sounded, as good as a wire. We're always looking to improve and improve and improve, and we want to be the best in wireless. We're a relative newcomer to this industry, but our aim is to become the best. And we knew we had to address, do more work on the range of the system. So we brought out this new modulation scheme, which we refer to as LR or long range. And really, this should be the one that people use as standard. It really does offer a significant improvement in range. I mean, we're seeing up to, it's hard to put a number on, and I don't want to put a number on it, but people have reported more than 50% improvement in range. It obviously depends on the RF environment you're in and all those things. But we did that. And people say that something sounds sinister about that. You can't just increase range with a firmware update, but we did. And the only sacrifice that we made is really a negligible one. It's a slight increase in latency. We went from 2 milliseconds, which is super low, to 3.9 milliseconds in latency, which is still really low as far as production sound dialog is concerned and for those type of applications. So, the benefits of that are obvious. Obviously, great range. And we've done a lot of comparisons out there with other systems on the market, and ours really does perform at least as well as the best out there, in certain situations better. So we're very proud of that. The other advantage of that too is if you're getting such great range at a certain RF power and you don't need that excessive long range, well, you can then choose to maybe lower your RF power, which has obviously just benefits for the general RF environment, interfering with other systems on set and stuff, but also preserving things like battery runtime. So it's definitely worth experimenting with that. And if anyone has tried the original A10 system and was looking for even better range than that, they should really look into trying the A20-RX or A20-RX with this new long-range modulation. It's a significant improvement. Obviously the other big, Gary and I have already alluded to it, and that's the filtering aspect of it, and how that by offering greater immunity to frequencies in the vicinity, like whether it's digital TV or whether it's IFB or camera hop transmitters locally placed in a bag, they are known to have an effect on the range of your talent receivers, obviously, because of the interference there. So we spent a lot of time sort of making the A20-RX, and this is part of the Spectraband technology, immune to that sort of interference. And Gary, why don't you talk about how, because like Michael said, got any tips on how you'd like to set this up? So give a little overview of how you go about setting up with the A20-RX.
Yeah, so your A20-RX workflow is similar to your A10, where you would get to your location and then you'd want to do a scan, right? And so you scan of your local RF environment and see, if I'm operating in UHF TV band, what do the local TV stations look like at this location? How well am I picking those up with my antenna system? What other transmitters are out there? Paul talked about maybe you've got a camera hop or an IFB or something like that. Looking at all of those signals, and then with the A20-RX, and then we're going to pick what we call a tuning band. So we're taking this wide spectrum band tuning and now we're narrowing it down to a specific tuning band. And these tuning bands are generally 24 to 36 megahertz wide, depending on where you are in the spectrum. But so you're picking the little chunk of spectrum that you want to use, and that's engaging this front end filter on your receiver. It's what we call a brick wall SAW filter. So SAW filter has a very sharp roll off outside of its window where you're looking for that signal from your wireless mics. And so as long as you're able to place something like an IFB or even your DTV signals outside of that tuning band, you've got very strong rejection, and that's always an advantage. So you're trying to find that clean, clear spectrum. You're selecting that tuning band. And then we've also got a new function with A20-RX called auto assign. And so once you've selected a tuning band, you can go in and there's a button that just says auto, and you can then have it, receiver will scan through that particular tuning band, find the spots with the lowest background noise level, and suggest a couple of frequencies for your receiver. Or if an application like you talked about before, where you've got, let's say, two A20-RXs in an SL2 slot chassis on an 8 series mixer recorder, it would suggest 4 frequencies for you for that setup. And so it really speeds, if you're in a fast-paced environment, it really speeds how easy it is to set up, and you've got kind of your best possible front-end filtering to get rid of any local interference.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that, all receivers will have their form of front-end filter or tracking filter and what have you, but what sets the A20-RX apart is that these are hardware filters. In fact, we have 40 total of these filters inside the A20-RX, and these hardware filters will give you a much better, steeper roll-off either side of the band that they're covering than any sort of more programmable tracking filter. So to give you an example, if you have a filter which covers the range 470 to 494 megahertz, for instance, just maybe 5 megahertz outside of those limits, say 465 megahertz, you will see sort of around like a 40 dB drop, attenuation of that out-of-band frequency, whereas a typical front-end filter or tracking filter will give you more like a 3 to 5 dB attenuation. And so that's vast. That's a huge improvement in terms of elimination and immunity to out-of-band interference, which can really make your use of the available spectrum far more efficient. You don't have to place those out-of-band, your tuning band that you want, so far away from the interfering signal. You can have it fairly close by.
Yeah, and you have some nice graphics on your website as well that kind of show that brick wall filtering versus, say, some other competitors out there as well.
Yeah, it's all in the SpectraBand article. But
yeah, we do. That SpectraBand article is a good thing to look at. We do generally recommend 12 megahertz outside of the tuning band if you're intentionally placing some other signal there that could be an interferer. But as Paul mentioned, if you've got like local DTV or something like that, being able to strongly filter that out, even if it's close by, is a big benefit.
Another topic that we could probably talk all day on was learning more about RF gain structure. And I know a lot of people, transmitter power versus antenna gain, they're always trying to just crank up the transmitter, but that's not always the case. So
right.
Any words of wisdom you can share on that?
Yeah, this is something I end up talking to people a lot on the application side. And I try to put it a little bit in sound guy terms if I can. This idea of having like amplified antennas are popular, and they have certain applications where they really are beneficial. But I like to think about that amplified antenna kind of like the preamp on your mixing console, right? If you take a preamp and if the signals, if you've got problems with the signal, turning the preamp all the way up isn't necessarily the right answer all the time, right? You might, at some point, you're just going to overload and start distorting coming into the channel on your mixer. And it's the same thing with an RF amplifier out in an antenna. You're just adding 12 dB, or I've seen people put 20 dB of gain into a system. You're amplifying your noise and interference just as much as you're amplifying the signal that you want to receive. And it's very easy to start overloading components further down your signal chain. So you do want to think about that gain structure all the way through. I think for a lot of folks, if your antenna is close to your receiver, which is, for me, close means within about 50 feet as long as you're using a low loss coaxial cable, then a passive antenna is, generally speaking, the best place to start. And if you want to get a little more range, then you might want to think about using like a directional antenna instead of an omnidirectional antenna. So Some things I see people using pretty popular are like a Betso bow tie, which is an omnidirectional antenna. Switching that out to some sort of a log periodic dipole, like those shark fin kind of looking antennas, can be helpful if you can point those antennas at talent and you get a little more range out of that. The nice thing about a directional antenna is it also will be less sensitive to an interfering signal that's behind it, essentially. So you're pointing it at the signal you want to receive, and if the signal that you don't want is out of that directional pattern, you can get some benefit
of a cardioid mic,
from
really,
it as well. Right, that's another good audio guy example. Is think about your shark fin antenna kind of like a cardioid mic, where it's more sensitive where you're aiming it, and it's less sensitive other spots. And so, and that has gain to it as well. So, compared to an omni antenna, your shark fin might have an additional 6 dB worth of RF gain, which is helpful, and that can easily make up for the loss through, let's say, 50 feet of low loss cable. And then you get to your receiver, and in a perfect world, you're using an A20 receiver with that really steep front end filter that's right there at the receiver. And so now you've got a good passive antenna, low loss cabling back, and good filtering coming into your receiver. And that really helps you get the best possible signal.
Is it worth just quickly talking about the control aspect of the A20-Mini transmitter? This is a app-controlled transmitter via Bluetooth. So whether it's an iOS device or an Android device, phone or tablet, you can basically set up all the parameters of your A20-Mini transmitter remotely. The range is pretty good. I mean, typically 20 to 40 feet is fine. So you don't have to go right up to the talent and bother them and, to sort of make any changes. You certainly don't need to get within their costume to sort of make any settings on the actual device itself. So, yeah, it's pretty good range, way better than our A20-RX remote app control, which has Bluetooth as well, but the range is typically only like a few feet. So we did quite a bit of work on the A20-Mini to make the range really good. And, from that app, as I said, you've got, you essentially, what you do is you create your inventory of A20-Mini mics, and that's very easy to do. You go into like what's called a pairing process with your app that when you purchase your A20-Minis, and you can add pretty much as many as you like. So it's just a big library of all the A20-Minis you have. And then depending on the job, you may only want to use a few of them or a large number of them. So you can basically just enable them from the inventory, which ones you want. And then they appear in what we call the active transmitter list. And from there, you can see all your transmitters. You can see the Bluetooth RSSI strength. You can see all the transmitter settings, like their frequency, what modulation scheme they're using, RF power level, muting, all the parameters. Then you have basically the ability to change all those settings very quickly and easily, frequency, RF power, all of that stuff. And then you can power on and off as well. So if you're between scenes and there's like 20 minutes of downtime and you want to conserve a bit of battery power, you can do that. It's a very quick process. Like, it takes about a second to turn on and off. You can actually do this in groups of transmitters as well. So for instance, you had like half a dozen minis out there, A20 minis out there. You can create a group of them and then power them all up and down with one button press. So it's a real time-saving feature. Yeah, so it's a really efficient way of setting up and keeping abreast of what's going on with your transmitters. Gary, talk a little bit more about the advantages of our digital system with regards to intermod.
Oh, sure, yeah. Digital microphone transmitters in general are more immune to intermod just because the type of output amplifiers that are used in those transmitters. So you have to get another transmitter extremely close to, two transmitters extremely close to one another, or three transmitters extremely close to each other for you to start to see these intermod products. And for people who don't do a lot of RF work, an intermod product is essentially like a harmonic where these two strong RF signals are mixing to create harmonic signals that are lower level, but they're interfering signals. With older analog systems, the those harmonic products could be fairly strong, even when the transmitters were maybe 6 feet from each other. Where with the digital systems, you have to get kind of within a foot to start seeing intermods with a lot of the better digital systems, including all the stuff from Sound Devices. So thinking about just your digital transmitters, it's not very often that you're going to see intermod products that are causing problems. But when you start to get into these larger systems, I think it's what Paul was talking about, where you've got mixed analog and digital, and you're not just thinking about wireless mics, but you're probably thinking about camera hop, IFB. Maybe you've got some speakers that are set up that you're sending wireless signals to speakers that are covering a video village or something, depending on your setup. You're going to want to think about frequency coordination and taking those potential intermod products into account if some of these transmitters are going to be close to each other and you've just got a lot of RF in the air.
All right, good stuff. Any new products coming out that you can share?
No, and yes. One thing we didn't talk about, and this does sort of cover a sort of like a new product, and we haven't spoken about the various backplate accessories for our A10-RX and A20-RX. We've got a new one coming out very shortly, which has got the rather bland model name ATA3, but it does what it says on the tin. It's basically a backplate that you can fit to the back of your A20-RX or A10-RX, which gives you basically two TA3 outputs, which can either be analog, or the first of those TA3s can be AES digital, and it's also got like a Heroes and a TA4 power input as well. So it's a really neat way of getting your analog and digital out. We already did have an accessory that provided that, but it was using tails, wire tails with XLRs on the outputs. So that is fine for some applications, but not as sort of like convenient where you're trying to get rid of spaghetti in a bag and things like that. So
yeah, the existing accessory has the equally interesting name of AXLR.
Do what they say on the tin. And then obviously the one that you're familiar with, Michael, the super slot backplate, which you're using with your SL2 now, that provides the 25 pin connectivity. And then what else have we got here?
If you're using a Sony camera, it is kind of a unique product in that other than Sony, we're the only people that make a slot adapter for Sony cameras that will send 2 audio channels directly into the camera from that 15-pin connection.
And digital, right?
Yeah, that's right. So if you're a Sony camera user, that's interesting to you. There's a RX Mon, which is kind of a cool product.
It's named by Jamaican.
I think mainly reality. Yeah. It's RX, man. It's got a headphone amplifier in it, and it runs on just an L-mount battery. And so you can slot in your A10 or A20 receiver and then just put on a pair of headphones and listen to it. And so, again, kind of popular in reality TV, where you've got folks who are wandering around that just want to be able to switch between some different receivers and directly monitor it using the exact same kind of slot receiver as the mixer recorder's using.
And the nice thing about that is we have something called user groups, where you can sort of give a nice descriptive name, the talent name or whatever, to a frequency. So then you can very easily on the receiver in your RX Mon, just scroll through the names, and so you can very quickly choose which talent member you're monitoring. There's one other thing that I want to the last thing I think is we do have a software utility that supports the A20 and A10 system called SD Utility. It's a free app for Mac or Windows. And essentially that, because not in the US, you can. In all our transmitters, the A20-Mini and the A20-RX have recording capability. In the US, you can't record and transmit at the same time for patent reasons, but in the rest of the world you can. But you can certainly do record or RF, and if you are working with a boom, you can record and transmit simultaneously in the US. But this utility that I referred to basically can take those recordings, whether it's a micro SD card from the A10 transmitter or whether it's directly from the A20-Mini. We have a USB-C port on there that you can very quickly transfer files to your computer from. And there you can bring in, say you had 8 transmitters, right? 8 members of the cast. You want to bring in all their individual recordings. You let them be recording all day. Maybe it's a reality show and you just let them run all day. You can bring in those files, and then you can conform to sound reports directly from your 8 series recorder, and it will basically splinter out or basically section out the parts of those super long individual transmitter recordings and pull out the relevant 15 minutes or whatever you need, which is conformed to the actual sound report data. And the other thing you can do then is also take these snippets and then interleave them into one big poly file, rather than having to send multiple files to post for them to sort of deal with, which can add a huge amount of time in post. So that's the SD Utility app. We should probably talk about another very important accessory called the Power Station 8M, which is an accessory for the A20-Mini transmitters. And it's basically an 8-slot device about the size of half a rack. And you can slot your A20-Minis directly into it, and they mate with a USB-C port within there. And that does a number of things. Firstly, it'll charge your transmitters directly there, all 8 simultaneously. On the back of the power station, there's a TA4 input or a USB-C PD power delivery port, which can be used to charge all the transmitters simultaneously. But it can also be used as a way to transfer all 8 transmitters' recorded data at once. So there's a file transfer port. You hook it up to your Mac or your Windows computer, and all of those transmitters will appear as volumes on your desktop, and then you can just drag the files directly off onto the desktop or into SD Utility to manage in whichever way you want.
Yeah, and it's a USB 3 hub, so the file transfer is fairly quick.
And then there's one other feature on that power station. It's actually got a BNC timecode input, so you can bring in your timecode master and then jam all your A20-Minis in one step from that source via the power station. So if you are recording and you need to make sure your files are in sync with picture, that's the quickest way to do it. And actually, there's another way you can jam. There's multiple ways you can jam the transmitters. We have these accessory cables, which are like LEMO to USB-C. So you'd plug the USB-C into the A20-Mini transmitter and the other end into your LEMO timecode source. Or we've got another cable, which is a USB-C to BNC. So that way you can bring timecode in and jam. And as soon as you plug the timecode in, the A20-Mini will detect it and automatically jam to it and set the frame rate automatically as well. So it's pretty intelligent. And the final way you can jam the A20-Minis is actually directly from your 8 series recorder, if you happen to own one. We developed our own sort of timecode over USB protocol. So you just connect your A20-Mini via its USB-C port to the USB-A port on the 8 series. Go to the timecode menu. You'll see a new menu appear there which says A20-Mini jam timecode. You go in there, hit the jam button, and you're synced. So
very nice. All right, I want to say thanks to Paul Isaacs and Gary Trenda for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, we appreciate you having us. We're honored. We listen to the show a lot, and it's a really informative show. We learn a lot, and some of the stuff we learn, we try and sort of adapt our products to. So keep it going. Keep it going.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
All right, well, I appreciate it, guys. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.